Welcome to the MC Squared podcast. This is episode 17. I'm Jimmy McCanna with my co-host,
Andrew McNeil.
Let's get to it.
We got a world to see and all the time to learn.
Welcome back, and thank you for being here with us. We're up to episode 17, which
Crazy,
is
isn't it?
mind-blowing. I didn't really think we were that far in, but this is super exciting. In the new studio, it's been awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, we have to give the update to the listeners about the
We don't have
McCanna
to. We don't have
McNeil
to.
clash.
I don't know. I
in
think we're fine.
The
If we
fantasy football.
Okay, fine. Whatever.
Well, I'm the commissioner, and I've already.
Oh,
I know I've messed up already because I allowed ties.
Yes.
My team has two ties.
You have two ties. And we almost tied last
Two
week. Did you know
ties,
that?
yes.
It was close.
We were real close. My team has continuously changed a name almost every week. I think it adds some little flair to the lack of play and point scoring that I have. But this last week, mano y mano, we had a little battle.
So the first time we played, we tied, which was extremely
The
disappointing.
very first week.
It was only surpassed by the disappointment of losing to you this week when I had you beat by 20 points or more.
Yes.
It felt that way. Maybe it wasn't that high because I lost by 5 because you had a tight end that went off on Monday Night Football.
Laporta.
Yeah.
I thought he was Hispanic, but he's not.
Yeah.
Big, tall guy.
Yeah.
He
So-
never catches passes. He usually
Yeah,
stinks,
yeah,
but
yeah.
he did really good and absolutely kind of blew you out there.
Yeah, I know. It wasn't
I
great.
wish I could have said I was watching it, but I came down and I was like, did I beat Andrew? And I just got the nod from my son. Yep.
I didn't even think about it till late on Wednesday. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in a fantasy football league. But you know what's crazy, Jimmy? Who's the leading scorer in that league?
Drew?
No,
Who?
me.
Oh, most points for.
Yeah, I'm the leading scorer,
Yeah.
and I am near the bottom of the league. How is that possible?
Well, everybody just has a good game against you. Isn't that
I
what
bring
every
out the
terrible
best.
team says?
Yeah, I bring out the best.
Yeah,
it's
everybody-
their Super Bowl.
Everybody
Yeah,
plays really good
it
against
was-
me. I would have beat them all
Right.
on points.
It was that winless team's Super Bowl. That's why they played us so well.
Well, I'm telling you what, that stat is not going to get you in the playoffs, Andrew.
No,
And
no, I
right
don't
now,
think it is.
you're on the cusp.
Well, you know what's surprised me most about this season, Jimmy, is how serious my wife Andrea is taking this.
Oh, that's good to know.
Oh, you have no idea. I isn't it amazing, Drew sitting behind our soundboard control board, whatever. She's taking it extremely serious, and now she's gone from not having a clue to pretty much taking the credit for every single personal transaction. She's like this football guru, and if she loses, she wants to quit, and if she wins, she's just like happy. I mean, I've never seen her do this.
Well, she had Mahomes.
Yeah.
What'd she think about the flu thing? He threw up like 3 points.
Yeah, I know. She was really, really angry.
Did she call
She
him,
asked
did she
if
call him on the
should
phone
dump-
after?
She should asked if she should cut him.
Did she call him on the phone after?
I'm like,
and say,
yes, I'm waiting to pick him up.
Yeah, cut him right now.
Right now.
I think he's on the no-cut list, actually, because he's that good. Yeah.
Probably.
But anyway, it's been a lot of fun.
It has been fun.
And we don't really have anything riding on it, do we?
No, just
I feel like Andrea thinks we might.
Oh
but
my
yeah.
gosh, yeah, absolutely. I'm like, I keep telling her, listen, these don't matter that much. All that matters is the playoffs. Just make sure you're not the two that get cut out of this
You
thing.
got to get to the playoffs. There's 8 teams, 6 get to the playoffs.
Yeah.
So, man, if you do not make it, you're really
Yeah,
bad.
I know.
We were there for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Anyway. Well, on to today's topic. So I think we're going to go into something a little bit different today, kind of outside of our usual politics, local politics, national politics.
And everybody
news.
applauses.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hold the applause.
Applaud.
Yeah, we know you are right now. But Andrew's got something to share, and then I think this is going to be a really cool podcast. So go for it.
Well, you know, Jimmy and I, every time we kind of not to digress, but we pray about every podcast. Sometimes it may not seem like that. We have a lot of fun together, but we are very intentional about what we bring to it, trying to bring value, something that's different. And today, I've had on my heart for a while that there's a very life-changing, life-altering story of my life that I wanted to share, wanted to get it out there. There are certainly close friends of mine and family members who know this story, but and I have shared this at some retreats and stuff. So, but not for a long time, and certainly not publicly to the point that. And in fact, I don't think you've heard the story.
No, I haven't, no.
And it's just such a critical thing that happened in my life that I felt like, maybe there's some help for some folks that might be struggling out there tonight. So this is totally off the subject of politics, totally off the subject of news. So, and I guess we'll tell you that now. So if you want to tune out, that's fine. Great. I mean, leave me to my, bearing my soul moment. That's fine. But, yes. but if you're interested to know what kind of, drives me, what has molded me, was one of the things that molded me, and also I think hopefully something helpful, then I would encourage you to tune in, especially to the end, and just hear the rest of the story. But it basically starts in 1994, and it was one of the. You ever have those times, those years that you can point to, and you go, everything changed in this year. I mean, just everything. I entered the year in 1994 as a college student at Huntington College. And by the end of that year, I had so many dramatic life changes. You wouldn't have recognized me from one end of the year to the other. But anyway, so I got married in 94, in June of 94, and to my wife, Andrea. And so basically, the story is this. I was the oldest of 7 children, all boys except for a girl. I did have a brother that was maybe a year younger than me that passed away when he was 8 months old, from a backward heart. He was born with a backward heart, and back then they didn't have any surgeries. Things had changed. They can deal with that now. They can do some things, corrective surgeries, but they didn't have that. So he struggled for 8 months, and then he passed away. And then my brother David was born. So David and I were 3 years apart. We were a homeschool family. So, I mean, Jimmy, with a homeschool family, you guys, you do get close, whether you like it or not. You get close. Your best friends a lot of times, or your friends, whether they're best or not, they're your brothers and sisters. And so me and David were close growing up. I am a very competitive person. If you didn't notice, I am a competitive type A personality. And David, my brother, was not. He was the easiest going kid you would ever know. Everybody liked David. David got along with everybody. He loved to play games with me. Like, me and him went out. We played football every single day after school. Every single day. Basketball with the neighbor kids who also were homeschooled, and that was our life growing up. But David wasn't competitive. He just enjoyed doing it. He enjoyed being with me and playing the game, and I regret to say this, something you look back on later, I got mad at him because he wasn't competitive. It's just, and I would pick on him as an older brother, trying to make him care,
Yeah.
Just a great thing. Anyway, so we also had a family store, McNeil Office Products, where we worked on copiers and sold office products on the square in Spencer, Indiana. And my dad was a copier service guy. He actually started the copier service department at Miller Huggins in Anderson, Indiana, back when copiers were basically brand new. I mean, brand new. They had duplicators. They didn't have copiers. Yeah, so he started the copier division there. And so eventually moved and had his own store. And so business was business was a struggle. I mean, our business was a struggle. My dad was a nice guy. People liked him. He had a lot of the county business. He had business here in Terre Haute, Maryland Community Church. We had their copier and H&R Blocks. But Dad couldn't, for the life of him, charge people for stuff. He just, you know, and almost apologetic, you know. I mean, he'd fix stuff. He was great at fixing stuff and just could never. He just didn't belong owning his own business, honestly. So we struggled a lot. And because of that, me and David worked there. We did paper routes. David did a paper route in town. I did a paper route in town, and you walked those. And then we would spend time at the store. So David would mind the store. And this particular year, in 1994, I was newly married. And we've got all of my wife's family, which is a pretty big family. My wife was from 7 kids. And then you've got, you know, I'm the first kid of the family to get married, and so we had all of our friends and our family over for this Thanksgiving, and we had a tradition. Do you have traditions on Thanksgiving besides the eating?
Yeah, besides the eating, we have a lot more around Christmas.
Yeah, well, we had a tradition where we played a football game, and I mean a tackle. It didn't matter how cold it was. It didn't matter how muddy it was. In fact, the muddier the better. We played this all-out tackle football game after the meal on Thanksgiving and Thanksgiving afternoon, and usually with our friends who were, like I said, in the neighborhood. We all lived, and we just would. I mean, we lived for it, Jimmy. I just got to be honest with you. So the week before Thanksgiving, me and David are in the store, and we're drawing up plays.
Serious.
Oh man, we were serious. Yeah. This was gonna be the football game of all football games. I'm serious. We were so excited about it. And to tell you how slow our store was, we would spend the afternoon throwing the football down the because it was kind of an oblong store. You know, you had your thing in the back, and we were throwing the football because Dad didn't know this at the time. I'm sure he'd have killed us if he'd known. But we were practicing, you know, because we were warming up a week in advance. Oh, man, we were all over it. So my wife was several months pregnant with my first child. And so we had Thanksgiving Day, and it was an absolutely gorgeous day. I mean, it was beautiful. It wasn't a cloud in the sky. We had this massive meal. I mean, it was so much joy and so much laughter and fun. And then we go up there to play. And I have a couple of other brothers. I had a younger brother who was too young to play, and David was taken. I mean, he went out early after the meal to make sure he was playing with him, you know, throwing the football with him, even though he wasn't going to get to play. Mm-hmm. And so he had a couple brothers he was doing that with too. So anyway, we get together, and we've got somebody filming it. Jimmy, we were all about this.
In 94.
Yeah, 94. Oh, yeah, no.
Big
yeah.
old VCR.
Yeah, it was actually. Camcorder. So we get to playing, and we're on opposite teams. And I don't know. I mean, I thought I was pretty good. And David was just kicking my butt. It was like he had this strength that, I mean, we were playing out in the field, and it was a little high, so it was a lot of work. But he scored several touchdowns, and I'm like, yeah, I couldn't hardly. It was strange. It was just this strange thing. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of it, he comes up to me and he said, Andrew, I feel really dizzy. And I'm like, okay, well, take a break, you know. And then he goes, no, I mean, I feel really dizzy. And that was the last words he said to me. Mm-hmm. He went down on his knees, and then he actually convulsed and went limp. And I called for my uncle and folks to go call 911, and I grabbed him, and noticed that he wasn't breathing. So I screamed in his ear. I said, David, breathe. And he would take a breath. And I noticed that he wasn't breathing again. Every time I screamed, it was for 5 or 10 minutes, screaming in his ear, David, breathe. And he would take a breath, but he was unconscious. And eventually we laid him down in the field, and we had somebody try to perform CPR on him. And it took a while because we were in the country. We were a good 15 minutes from town, and it took them a while to get out there. But his heart was still beating, but he wasn't breathing. And we had his parents and people from our church and friends. Sorry. That's all right. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Laying hands on him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously we were all praying, but laying hands on him, trying to, and and then they felt his, the life go out of him. The ambulance got there, and they tried shocking him right there in the field, drugs in his veins, whatever they could do. And I remember leaning over to my wife, who's, big pregnant in the field. And I'm in shock, and I just said, I think he's gone, and he may come back. I mean, I was hopeful that he would. You'd think, okay, they can bring him back, right? Yeah. But he's gone. I mean, he is gone, and they never brought him back. He couldn't, and they didn't know what happened. David was 6 days away from his 18th birthday. He had graduated high school the previous May, and so one of the other things David did that he liked to do was he liked to write songs, and he used to write a lot of worship songs. I mean, he loved the Lord. David absolutely loved the Lord. So I guess I'll back up real quickly because this is something that was kind of crazy that happened. I had a dream several months previous to that, and I believe that the Lord can speak to you in dreams. Absolutely. We see that in the Bible a lot, and I know that for some folks that's kind of like, oh, that's way out there, and not every dream you have is from the Lord. I mean, you live long enough, you realize some are pizza dreams, some are just activity dreams, some are dreams you want to have happen. Mm-hmm. But I had a dream several months before this, Jimmy, and in the dream, I'm at a funeral, and I am devastated at this funeral. I am crying and really upset. I didn't know who had died. I actually, when I woke up, assumed it was my wife because it was someone you cared about so much. Mm-hmm. But in the dream, I knew that this was an opportunity to preach the gospel. And I saw myself walking down an aisle of an absolutely packed room with some kind of a folder. And I knew I was going to speak and direct people to the Lord. Isn't that crazy? So as you can imagine, it was awful. So we had to prepare for his funeral. And they asked me to go down to the store at night, McNeil Office Products, at night, and go through his stuff. He had lots of letters and stuff there, but also to try to piece together some worship songs for his funeral. And I am there, and I am just having, Jimmy, a life-changing moment. I loved the Lord. I was raised in church, and I had given my heart to the Lord when I was very young. And prior to getting married, had another kind of a life-changing moment where I really yielded my will to the Lord, if you will. So I was a Christian. I mean, I love the Lord, but there is something when something like that happens, and everything changes. It's like everything you thought was important is not important anymore, and things that you were doing or things that you were apathetic about, you're not apathetic about it anymore. You don't take anything for granted. And heaven becomes extremely close and real. And I remember praying for revival for Spencer, Indiana. I remember asking the Lord to move at his funeral, just praying for God to move and for God to move in me, to make me more fervent in my faith. And so that was kind of the event. And what's crazy is we had a friend of the family as a pastor come in to do the funeral. But I was literally walking down. They had so many people that wanted to be there. David was a part of a youth retreat called Chrysalis. He was one of the first ones in this community here in Terre Haute area. Actually, he was at, I believe, at Miram or Clay City. Talked me into going to Emmaus, which I didn't want to do, and it was, again, I mean, David loved Andrea before I ever liked her, and he's like, man, what is your problem? That won't, she's a great person. She's like made for you, which he was right. So I'm walking down the aisle of the Methodist Church in Spencer that is absolutely packed with people, and it hits me. There's his coffin in the front, and it hits me that this is my dream. This is exactly my dream. Everything was vividly exactly like my dream. And I walked down, and they wanted me to speak. And so I spoke, and what I shared was there were so many people in that audience that David was called the singing paper boy because he did, and David was hilarious. David was goofy. He'd have printer ink all over his nose half the time because he had allergies, so he's constantly doing this with his nose. And carrying all those papers, you get ink all over your hands. He'd have black on his nose, and those old folks just absolutely adored him. And he prayed for every one of them. And so when I got up there, I shared about Jesus because it wasn't about the McNeils. It wasn't even about David. It was about David is in heaven, and he sowed into each one of you. The singing was over you. The praying was for you. He would want you to know about Jesus. And I felt like God was able to use that as something in my life that really propelled me to that. But I gotta be honest, it was really devastating for me because, and I'm gonna be kind of vulnerable here, when you have a sibling that passes away, you start to review everything that you've done with them.
Sure.
Every mean thing you've ever said, every time that you either neglected them or were mean or whatever, every argument, whatever it is. And God used it to break Andrew. Because I'm a strong personality. And David was full of life, loved the Lord, but he was not like me. He was someone you could hurt. And I realized that I obviously had wasted time and I had hurt him. He was the best man at my wedding. I loved him, but I needed some changes in my life. So I had another dream, and I've been grieving for a while, but I had another dream, and I feel like this is maybe this somebody out there that's listening to this, maybe this will be something that'll speak to you, because I think this applies to everyone who's dealt with overwhelming grief. In the dream, I'm holding David like I was on that field. And David looks up at me and he says, Andrew, he says, I'm too heavy for you. You're going to have to let me go. And the big brother that I am, I'm like, no, I've got you. And he just kind of smiled and he said, no, I am too heavy for you. And in the dream, he suddenly became like 1,000,000 pounds. I couldn't hold him. And that's the reality. Sometimes that grief, or always that grief, it's too much for us to carry. I couldn't carry him anymore. I had to let him go. And the greatest relief and healing came when I was able to let David go, and also to forgive myself. To say, okay, let's just be honest here. The things that you've done, the things that needed to be changed, and the pain of this is something that you can let happen to change you. So let's get rid of the self-pity. Let's not live in under condemnation. Let's forgive yourself, but let it change you. And so God graciously was able to do that as a work. And honestly, after that time, opportunities started opening up for me to share this story. And I shared this at several men's retreats, probably 3 or 4, a couple of youth retreats. And it's just been an opportunity to share. And in the message that is not about, how hard this was for me, but it is again a message of how close heaven is, how temporal our life is, yes, and how even the worst things, honestly, I believe this, Jimmy, if we will yield ourselves to the Lord and allow him to take things that are terribly painful, that don't make sense. I mean, for me, there are lots of folks who have lost people. There's lots of folks in this world that have lost a lot worse than a brother. I mean, they've lost a mate or they've lost a child. Or other griefs that are just unbelievable and horrible to bear. But I have noticed in my life that I have a tenderness towards other people that are struggling with this. And I'm not afraid to be in a room where people are grieving. I'm not afraid of it at all. No matter the grief, I can't help them, but I feel I want to empathize with them. I feel that need for them to feel the comfort of the Lord that I had. Yeah. And grief to me is a terrible thing, but in this world, God uses it to bring really, if you'll yield to him and you'll embrace that pain, honestly, he does some amazing, amazing things out of it. So my life did change. I started walking with the Lord in a different way, and I kind of hesitated to share this part because people might misunderstand it. But at the time, I said to my wife, I said, "Sweetheart, I will always love you, always." We're not talking about any kind of but we were having some conflict at the time. Not all her fault at all, but I told her, I said, I'm walking on with the Lord, with or without you. And again, I hesitate to say that because it sounds like it's I'm moving on without you. That's not what I was saying. That's not what she took it as. It was basically a rephrasing of Joshua where he says, as for me and my house, we're serving the Lord. And that's what it was. I love you, but you aren't first. You were first before. You're not first. Jesus is first. He has to be. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the story of my brother. Now the crazy thing was he wrote a ton of stuff. So we did put together a book at the time. Trying to think if there's anything in here I wanted to read. We had some letters, or we had some letters that people had written to him, and he wrote some pretty funny stuff. Here's a political one. He wrote in May, the United States tax is getting out of hand. In 1775, at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, British taxes were 5%. The United States government today takes up to 30%, which it's way more than that now. So he would be upset. He said the government leaves us no room to argue. We've got more reason for a war today than our forefathers did over 200 years ago. And I like how he ends it. He goes, now year by year, taxes rates continue to increase. We step just closer to signing our entire checks to the government.
That was in 94.
That was in 94. It's gotten way, way worse. But this is good too. I thought about myself today. So I put a picture out on Facebook, and I'm going to quit talking. I am talking way too much.
No, this is good.
But I put a picture out today of the car that I've got that's got a million lights on it. It's got engine light and all kinds of crazy stuff. So this kind of is appropriate. So it must be in the family because David wrote this about my dad. He goes, I was thinking about your old worn-out car today, Dad. I walked past it when I came into the house tonight, and it put the exclamation point on all my thoughts. The wheezing motor simply said, end of the road. This pop would seem to be the perfect time for a trade-in. Let go of the clunker and get something with flash and style. Now, this tell you when it was written. A red 95 Camaro, exactly what a buff guy like you needs. Why step out of a car with shame? Get the car that is you. It's not just looks and style that are involved here. We're talking about better gas mileage, lower costs, and faster transportation. It's what you desperately need right away. Think about it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and he wrote so many. He actually wrote one, and it wasn't in the book, and I shared this at the funeral. He had been praying, and this may be some encouragement. No, this won't be. I don't want to say it this way. This is a terrible thing to say. But let me just put it this way. This is encouragement for David, because God was speaking to him all along the way. Yeah. He didn't know what he was going to do. Didn't know if he was going to college. He wanted to get married and didn't have, nobody was in the picture, and he was just desperate. He had been fasting and praying. And he wrote it down. He said, the Lord just told me, he said, David, your life is in my hands. And he said after that, there was total peace. And he didn't strive anymore. Wow. And it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. So there was no cause of death. They examined his heart. There was no brain aneurysm. So we do believe it was his time, but it's hard to grasp that. I feel like there had to be a reason. I don't know what that was. Yeah. His heart was still beating without breathing, so maybe a brain, I don't know, issue. But he was gone. The doctors, nobody knew David. I mean, the doctors didn't know, and so they're all like, "Was he on drugs?" All this kind of stuff. You're like, "Do you know who no." And back then, it was even more rare. I mean, now it's be very common, but no, we're homeschool nerds. We were not on drugs. We wouldn't even know where to get them back then, unless it was, who knows? Yeah. So,
wow, thanks, Andrew. Well, that was. Not heard the story before. That is
absolutely. I feel like I not wanting to be a downer, but I do want it shared. I think sometimes, and I didn't want it shared on Thanksgiving Day. What a terrible story.
Yeah.
But God is. Let me finish with this, and then we'll move on, and maybe we'll talk about something else, or maybe expand on it some or whatever. But to wrap up. We're ending the year in 94, and we're all still very grieving. I mean, it's still devastating to us. And we got together just to pray and to seek the Lord for the year. We always did that anyway. And I heard the Lord as clear as a bell say, out of ashes, I'm going to bring forth joy. And at the time, we didn't know what my firstborn child was going to be. And when she was born, I knew what her name was going to be. And my daughter Joy has been a joy to us.
Yeah. So. Wow, that's awesome. That is amazing. Thanks, Andrew, for being so vulnerable and open with this story. Obviously, it's the first time I've ever heard it. And I was just saying, I've never experienced something that traumatic in my life. I've gone through things in my head before that are similar, and I think everybody probably has.
Yeah.
The question I want to ask you is, like, during those times, like, of that time of grief, did you ever doubt the Lord?
I did not. I know a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's completely understandable. I felt the Lord's presence stronger than I had felt him at that time, than I had ever felt him before at that time. And the Bible says that the Lord is near to the brokenhearted.
Yes, he is.
But I do think that we have a choice in those times of crisis or grief where we have to choose to let him in.
Yeah.
And I have seen people who get angry right away.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's different. Everybody's going to react to those kind of situations differently. I mean, I'm not saying any of this to pat myself on the back. I felt the presence of the Lord. I felt him stronger in that grief and pain. And I knew he was calling me,
Yeah.
and doing a work inside of me at the same time. So, no.
I think it really goes, it really kind of shows us our duty in bringing up the next generation, because that is the steadfastness that we want to see in the next generation.
Yeah.
Because you would not have been able to hear his voice unless you had heard it before.
It's true.
He could have been calling, but you knew it from the time you were young. And and if your kids don't know the Lord, now's the time to let them know.
Yeah.
They need to have that, because everybody would want their kids to be able to weather through tragedy.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people don't think that something like this will happen. You just kind of put it off. But the Father is there.
Yeah. And
I think he really, in all situations, tries to reach out during these times of hurting. Like the veil is thinner at that point.
Yeah.
But you had heard his voice as a young kid.
Right.
And you knew his voice. And you knew it was him. And I just think it's such a encouragement and just maybe a real push for, as a parent, for our children's children, which, to have such a strong relationship and to know the Father's voice.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what the world will bring, but we want them to be able to remain close to him in times. And I think that's when people falter and fail, and it happens. If you did not have the Lord through this, my goodness, I just don't. This is what puts people on drugs. This is what puts people in continuous mental disorders for the rest of their lives. I mean, it could lead to that. But when you talk about a pivotal moment in your life, there is that opportunity to pivot. So we're not always saying, when you pivot, you're turning. Yeah. You can turn in one direction, another direction. And I think a lot of us have had that moment where we pivot. And I think instilling that knowledge of the Father in our children will help them to pivot in the correct direction.
Right. No, I agree.
Yeah.
I believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's that was heavy.
Yeah. And again, I feel like it's a story that needed to be shared, but it's also, I don't want it to be so heavy. But here's the reality, Jimmy. There are so many people walking around, maybe even have a smile on their face, but they're inside, they're dying. Yeah. They're deeply struggling. They've had a loss like that or worse, and it's been decades, and they don't feel any better. I mean, I've heard these stories. Mm-hmm. And the reality is I am whole. It's been a very, very long time, but I'm going to see David again. He is he's more alive than we are. Yeah. I mean, he's with Jesus.
Yeah.
That spurs me on. I'm like, I've already got folks there.
Yeah.
I've got a cloud of witnesses already.
That's right.
So everything I do needs to be for the kingdom of God and lasting. And a lot of people don't know this, but I mean, when I ran for any kind of political office, it has always been because I felt like it was a kingdom thing, like it was something that I could do in the physical realm that would maybe expand or extend the kingdom of God. Now, I may have been wrong-headed in that and certainly would have had my work cut out for me. So God saw fit that it was something else. Maybe it's a podcast. I hope it is. We're not doing this podcast just to have fun. I mean, we aren't. We are having fun. We do have a lot of fun. But we do this podcast to be meaningful to people.
Yeah.
To be useful to them.
Yeah.
One way or the other. If it's given some information about Israel that we feel, or political or news, but certainly life stories. It's the story I've lived. And, John Maxwell talked about growth being so important, and that you don't have to have painful things to grow, but that generally it's painful things that help us to grow. And honestly, I agree with that. I'm like, yes, I want to grow. I want to grow without having to have pain. And yet I'm almost always really having change in my life when something painful happens. And I think it's a good way to look at pain. See, this society, you were talking about the drugs and all that kind of stuff. This society is geared towards avoiding pain at all cost. Yeah. We don't want any pain. If you're depressed, get on a pill. If you're emotionally hurt, get on a pill. And the reality is, those things can change you. Not the pills. The pain can change you for the better.
Yeah. If
you will allow it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're in pain because we're doing something wrong. I mean, people don't want to admit we ever do anything wrong.
Yeah.
But you keep kicking a stove and you're stubbing your toe and you're in a lot of pain, it's because you're kicking the stove. Stop it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are times that really good things can come from what seems like complete disaster or loss or hurt or pain. And it isn't that time heals all wounds, because I've seen folks, like I said, that never seem to get over it. Jesus heals. He heals, and he heals completely. He heals totally. The scar is still there. I still get teared up talking about it. I miss him.
Yeah.
He was a great treasure in my life, a gift from the Lord. But I'm not in grief. I'm not walking around with a cloud in my heart or in my life. And I want people to know, because David loved Jesus. He was ready to go. And for what I share to the young people whenever I do this story, that's the message I leave. Mm-hmm. David was 6 days away from his 18th birthday, and like that, with no warning. It wasn't even an accident, or which can happen, or anything like that. It was out of the blue. There were no warning signs, and he was ready to go. Jimmy, he was ready. Mm-hmm. He was on fire for the Lord. He loved Jesus, and he had done everything he could to be obedient to what God had for his life. And the Bible says that unless a seed of grain falls into the ground and dies, if it doesn't do that, it remains alone. There's nothing that happens. But if it does go into the ground and die, then it produces a harvest. Mm-hmm. And David's life produced a harvest in me. Mm-hmm. He did. He produced a harvest in a lot of other folks' lives. Over the years, this story's been shared many times to folks getting right with the Lord. And so his death really brought a lot of life. And that can happen, even in those painful things, if we give them to the Lord. So
yeah. So do you think that for people listening, if there's somebody that's facing something that's deep like this, maybe not as bad as what you had faced there, but they're at one of these pivotal moments, and maybe they have a lot of grief that's continuing to build and build and build and build. What do you say for them right now? What's the next step?
Well, I don't think first of all, there's no pat answer.
Yeah.
But having been there, cry out in honest truth to the Lord.
Yeah, that's what.
Honest truth. You can tell him you're angry. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was hesitant to say that I was not angry. I was hesitant to say that because I don't think there's a wrong attitude or emotion when that happens. You're going to have a very real. I'm not saying if something else didn't happen, that I wouldn't be angry. But in that moment, I wasn't. But you can be angry. You could, whatever it is, be honest and open and real, but do not shut that communication off. Yeah. Because he is the only source of life and healing. He is it. There is no other place. You're not going to find it in alcohol. You're not going to find it in another relationship. You're not going to find it in a drug. The only thing those drugs ever do is just mask and kind of calm. They just kind of put a cap on it. They don't heal you.
They numb it.
Yeah. And sometimes, unfortunately, Jimmy, we need to feel the pain.
Yeah.
It's a necessary part of living that we have to process. And I'm afraid that too many of this generation's been cut short of processing things properly emotionally.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
So, well, folks, I hope that was of some hope to you, and maybe, not trying to be a downer. Some of these, it's a sad story, but it's also a redeeming story. And truthfully, everything that God brings you through becomes a redeeming story.
It does.
And I wanted to share it with you because it is a big impact in my life. It was a big thing for me and my family, and kind of set me on the course of, maybe being the radical that I am, because heaven becomes so real. Me and Jimmy would love to pray for you if you're hurting and you have something that is just overwhelming. Honestly, me and Jimmy would love to pray for you. So if you want to message us, Jimmy, what's that email?
The MC Squared Podcast at gmail.com. And we would love that, Andrew.
Yeah, honestly, your email is going to be confidential. Just be between me and Jimmy. We'll pray for you. We'll ask the Lord to help and to bless you in your life. And we really appreciate the rest of you.
And there's hope on the other side.
There is hope on the other side.
There is hope on the other side.
There really is. So we really want to wish all of you guys to have a wonderful rest of the week. Thanks for watching this video or listening to this podcast. We need you desperately to subscribe, to like the video. You've heard the mantra.
Yes.
Share it with your friends and your family. Get the subscribers up. I don't even want to talk about now in this video how few subscribers we have to this brand new. It is a brand new channel. We haven't been doing it from the beginning of the podcast, but. For heaven's sakes, it should be higher than it is right now. So we're hoping that we get a few more subscribers.
And maybe this wasn't necessarily something that registered with you, but somebody who would need to hear it. Send it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
thanks for being with us, and we will see you next time.
Absolutely.
Later.
I got a fire in me. You're gonna set to burn.